looks like I have a slight burr in my table saw opening or on the table someplace. There is this real fine groove that runs at a specific distance. By looking at this here, I'll actually be able to figure out where that burr is, because I've seen this before. But typically, if it's been on the front of a raised panel, it wouldn't matter. But being that this is the front side, I have to sand this surface entirely before building the door. So I'm going to need to work to get this this line out of here, which is actually like a little tiny groove. So I've switched the sander to 100 grit aluminum oxide paper, and that'll help buff that out. And then I'll finish sand this with 150, and then we'll build the doors. One other thing is I will also take a sanding sponge, as you'll see here shortly, and I'll lightly sand these beaded profiles as well. Because once the door is put together, it's kind of hard to get at all of this, so it's best to sand everything prior to assembly. Now I will also sand the back as well. I already sanded the profiles here, but I'll sand this back a little bit, and the reason being, this is the actual first time I've actually built what they call a reversed raised panel door. And what that means is basically, this is the front, okay? This is the back. And basically, rather than making a 1/4 inch thick panel, I make a thicker panel and cut the back out with a small raised panel. What I didn't take into account for was the distance from here to here, and it looks to be, I don't have my tape measure on me, but I could have made these panels at least 7/16, but that'll be alright, because what I'll do is, like I said, I will hand sand these with the orbital first, and when I take this back to the company that does my wide belt time saver work, or wide belt sanding, by the time they touch the back, this will probably get touched very lightly as well, but it doesn't hurt to pre-sand this. Now on a typical raised panel door, this would be the front side, and this would be the back without the grooves. But this particular customer, being my sister-in-law, she wanted something different in her panels. So like I said, this is a reversed raised panel, this is the back side, and this is the front. And I'm going to stain this cabinet kind of a really rich candy apple red with a black glaze. So anyways, I'm going to keep on sanding here. Okay. I'm going to use one of these 3M sponges, and I'm just going to lightly rub this into the angles here and touch the rounded or beaded profile at the same time. Some moderate pressure. And basically all I'm doing is I'm just putting a little bit of a kind of a scratch pattern, if you will, in the polished profile. Now, even though I took a lot of time in running these profiles to make sure that there's no chatter and everything, you still run the risk a little bit of actually polishing the profile at the same time, meaning that the cutters, the tips, or the inserts, if you will, they're actually pounding the pores on the wood shut. So this here, basically, I'm just using this sponge just to lightly sand this to kind of create, like I said, a little bit of a sanding scratch to help take the stain a little bit better. So I'll sand the back the same way. Now I should point out that sometimes if you get a deep scratch like this, or a groove that just isn't sanding out very well, you can take a little bit of water on a rag, and basically what you're going to do is have just a damp rag and just rub it across that area that's affected with the scratch, and let it sit for a little bit. And then there's one of two things you can do after that. You can just let it evaporate, and then what'll happen is you'll raise the grain, and then when you go to sand it, you'll actually knock the high spot of the grain off, leveling everything out again. The other thing that you can do, especially if it's like a scratch, for example, like had a scratch go this way, or just like a little bit of a gouge, it's not very deep, as long as you didn't break the fibers. If it's like a dent, for example, you can take take a rag again and take a household iron, bring it up to full temperature, and lay the damp rag down over the dent or the light scratch, and apply the iron to the damp rag. And what that'll do is that creates steam, and the steam will also raise the fibers back up again. So you can come back with your sander and knock off the fibers. So if I had more panels with this same scratch in it, what I would probably do then is just take a rag with water on it and just wipe over that spot on all the panels, and then let them dry a little bit so that way I can feel a little bit of a grain raise, and then take the orbital sander and then sand it off. So being I've only got 2 panels, I'm just going to work a little harder with my sander. I just want to look here to make sure that that scratch isn't there, because if it's still there and I don't take care of it now, the stain is definitely going to show me where the scratch is. And it's going to be harder to repair once the door is put together. So I want to make sure that I find that scratch, if it still exists yet, and work it out. So far here, I don't really see it. I'm going to go over it a little bit more, and then I'm going to switch to the grit. Okay, I'm going to take my fine sanding sponge again and just go over these profiles. Okay, I'm going to switch to a finer grip. This here is a 150 grit. I like using this Ecomant, also known as Unita Eka Blue paper. It's a really nice paper for whitewood sanding, and I really like this particular paper because it's not a stearated paper. It works very well for your denser woods like birch and maple, especially if you're going to be doing some staining. The more help you can give your wood in sanding, your stain color is going to look a lot better and more consistent. The one thing I should point out when I do my finish sanding, I do not spend a lot of time with the finishing grit on the surface. Basically, I just go over it a couple times and that's it. If you continue to keep sanding all of your wooden parts with the fine sandpaper and keep on sanding it over and over, you start knocking the grit off this paper, and then you actually start polishing the wood surface. So you don't really want to do that. You just basically, with your final finishing grit, in this case it's 150, just go over it a couple times. Don't spend a lot of time on it. Just make sure that you sand the entire surface nice and even. Here we have it. 2 panels ready to make a couple doors. So I'm going to grab the parts and I'm going to show you how I'm going to glue these 2 doors up. Okay, so what I've been doing here for the last couple minutes is getting the stiles and rails ready for preparation of putting the door together. And what I've been doing is I've been installing these little footballs, actually space balls they're called. That's actually their true name is called space balls. And let's see if I can get a better view here. Anyways, as you can see, there's like a little black round ball in the groove here, and this here is essentially what it is. It's just a little black rubber ball, and they're kind of squishy to a certain extent, but they don't have a memory, so they always go back to their original shape. And what this does is, when you put it in all four of your frame pieces for your door, is it centers the panel in both directions, both vertically and horizontally. And this is especially important, for example, in the width of the door or vertically, so that way with the solid panel, being it's solid wood, that panel is going to expand and contract a little bit with different changes in weather and climate. So by putting the space balls in here, it'll automatically center the panel regardless of when it shrinks or when it expands. So when I size these panels, I size them specifically for these space balls, which is about 5/16 less than the length of the rails. So essentially what's happening is this is a 1/4 inch space ball, and they recommend it to compress it roughly about half of its thickness. So basically I'm compressing it about 1/8 of an inch, give or take a little bit. So anyways, so I'm gonna start putting these doors together here, and when I glue these rails, I want to make sure that I don't get too much glue up towards the top edge here, and especially right here in the front of the profile, because what will happen is when you put the door together, it'll squeeze out right in this corner here, and then you get a big mess. So typically when I glue this up, I'll put a little bit right here, a good amount on the back here, and then just a little bit on the front, and then I also make sure to get some on the shoulder here, keeping away, you know, probably at least a finger width away from the shoulder, because when you put the door together, there's a lot of hydraulic pressure there because of the glue, and the glue will squeeze out everywhere. So I want to make sure that you keep it away from this front inside profile. Let's see if I can do this here. Okay, and we'll do this tenon. Again, see, I kept it away from that inside, and then now this doesn't look like a whole lot of glue, but believe it or not, that when these joints are precision like they are, and they have some fairly tight tolerances, the tighter the tolerances, the more this glue will spread. Now, being that I use disposable tooling or insert tooling for cutting my stiles and rails, meaning that when the tips are dull I can throw them away, or I can actually have them resharpened, but the tips are replaceable versus sending the cutter in to get sharpened like you would with a router bit or a saw blade. They have a tendency of being a little bit looser than a traditional brazed set of tooling, where the actual tips are brazed onto the body, and then typically what you could do is you could shim the individual cutters that make up this particular cut. But anyways, this is about the much glue as I use on it, and I'm going to do this to the rest of them, and then I'll try and get a close-up here as far as how much glue squeeze out there is on the surface. And hopefully it doesn't squeeze out right here into the inside. So I install one rail first. The next I'm going to install a panel, and being that this is the face, and I've got the face of the door facing me, I'm going to set it in like this. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the other rail. Now, if you really wanted to be really precision and really make sure you got all this glue coverage, you could also take like a small paintbrush or a little acid brush, also known, it's a little silver brush. It has, I believe it's horsehair in it, and you could spread this around as well. And the thing I found with that is that it takes a lot more time to spread that glue around, and then it starts to dry out on you. Once this glue starts skinning over, it's too late. You got to be able to get your parts together while the glue is still wet yet and not skinning over. You can use a glue with a longer open time. This one I think has 5 minutes, so you got basically 5 minutes of workability. You can get some extended glue, which is a slower set time, I think about 15 minutes. But okay, so I'm laying it, actually I'm going to lay it face up. And I'm going to make sure that I have all of my stiles and rails even with each other. Now, being that these doors are not a traditional overlay, they're actually an inset application, meaning the door will sit inside the frame like an old piece of furniture. I really want to make sure that I get these doors as square as possible, because it's going to make it a lot easier when it comes time to fitting the door to the opening. And I also want to make sure that I get the rail even or flush with the stile, as best as I can. Okay, now that I have that, I'm just going to tighten these up nice and snug. Take just a shop towel or a rag and wipe off the glue. But let me see if I can show you the glue here first. That's what you want. Nice even squeeze out, but there's nothing in the inside. So I got it on the face here. I got a little bit coming out of the end. That's good. That's good. And that one's good. So no squeeze out. This is what I was talking about. You don't want any squeeze out right in this corner here. Anything on the face or on the outside edge and on the back is fine. That'll get taken care of in the sanding process. So I'm just going to take a shop rag here and just wipe off the glue, just get all the excess off it. Because I'll be taking these doors back to a local shop that has a big wide belt sander, generically known as a time saver. And what it is it's a great big belt sander with a conveyor belt underneath the belt, and you feed the doors through, and the big sanding belt basically flushes out the entire surface of the door, front or back, depending on which way you run it. Essentially, it's like a glorified planer, except for using planer knives. It actually uses a big wide belt, much like just a regular belt sander. So, and they're typically or generically known as a time saver. Okay, I want to make sure that this door is square as possible. I have 29 and just a touch under 13/16. This one is 29 3/4. I'm going to check this one again here. It is about a 32nd of an inch on a square, and that could be anything. I find myself trying to chase a 32nd of an inch is next thing to impossible. So I'm going to leave this. This door is oversized, by the way. I build all my doors 1/8 inch oversized. And what I'll do with that is I'm going to let this, if it was a 16th or more, obviously I would really have to square it out. But what I've learned is, especially when it comes to building doors, just like any project, but if you get all your cuts square and you glue it up with your clamps, your door or your face trim or whichever should automatically square up based off the shoulders of the cut. I did check the squareness of the jig on the shaper used for cutting tenons, and I was getting a square cut off there, so I'm not sure where this is actually coming from. It could be just a tweak of the clamp, but what I have found is 99% of the time when your joints are cut square, especially in this case off the shaper, because they trim about a 32nd of an inch off of each tenon when I run the rails, that the doors will square themselves up. But however, that's only as good as the operator. What I've also learned is that if you're in a hurry and you lay your rails into the shaper, into the jig, and you get a little chip on the bottom, kind of in the corner, it'll offset the squareness of this rail when you machine it. So therefore, if this one tenon is slightly off, like a quarter of a degree or not even, it'll throw the entire door off. So that could be what happened. But if this other door is unsquare as well, I'm probably going to need to relook at that jig, and maybe the jig is slightly off. If that's the case, I have some adjustments I can make on there to make sure that these shoulders are square. So being that this is not quite a 32nd, I'm going to let this in the clamps. Typically, I would pin nail the back side and release the clamps if I had a lot of doors. But being that I've only got 2 doors for this cabinet, I'm just going to leave them in the clamps. I'm going to take this door, I'm going to wipe off the back side here, and leave it in the clamps, and then I will clamp up the next one. So I don't know how well you can see that, but that is one completed door. So when I put these space balls in, I want to make sure that I don't put one right where the tenon's going to go. I want to make sure I want to hold it back. So typically I just take my rail, or in this case I can also actually take my hand, which is a little bit wider, but I can just basically take my 4 fingers and place one along the side here. They don't have to be right up close to the rail. In fact, actually they can be down a little bit. It's recommended to be down, you know, at least a ½ inch or so. And depending on the length of your styles here, you may need to put more than 2 in here. Being that these styles are roughly about 28 inches, I'm only going to put 2 in there because it'll be supported approximately 22 inches apart from each other. So if you do 3 inches from each end, you got 22 inches of support. So, and the panel is about 23 and a ½ inches roughly. So now I get these space balls from my hardware supplier, but you can get them online too, or you can actually go to the website or just Google it, spaceballs.com. And I know it kind of sounds weird and possibly inappropriate, but that's what these actual little rubber balls are called. They're actually called space balls, and they're patent pending. There's only a couple manufacturers I know of out there that make something identical to it. Spaceballs is one of them, and there's another manufacturer that makes an item like this, but it kind of looks like a little football or a barrel. It's probably about 3/8 of an inch long, or maybe a ½ inch long, and a 1/4 inch thick, and you have to lay them flat. The problem with them is, if you're not careful when you put these in place, if you're in a hurry with the barrels or footballs, if you get one standing up in the groove vertically, when you go put the door together, if you don't catch it, you can actually, because there's so much pressure there and that rubber's got to go someplace, they'll actually bust out the back of your frame. So you don't want that. So I used them for many years, and I decided to give these a shot. They were the same price. I think they were a little bit more. I want to say per 1,000 of these. They typically sell these by the 1,000. I want to say it was like $2 more per 1,000 compared to, I want to say if I was paying $12 for 1,000 of the footballs, I was paying like $13 and some odd cents roughly for 1,000 of these space balls. The difference with the space balls is that the more you purchased, the cheaper it got. There was actually significant discounts. I think if you were at 5,000 or more, but 5,000 space balls would last me a while, so I probably go through maybe 1,000 a year at the most. So anyways, now you might be wondering, those of you who are kind of new to making 5-piece doors, if the insert or if the panel was made out of like a 1/4 inch sheet stock material, whether it be plywood or fiber core, whichever, I would typically only size the panel about a 32nd undersize, and then actually glue it into place, because there's really nothing to expand and contract in that panel. But being that the panel in these doors is a solid panel, it's going to expand and contract in different changes in the weather and climate and season. So there's another way you could do this as well. You could still size the panel a little bit narrower. I know I worked for a company where we only sized the panel 1/8 inch smaller in width than the rail, and we would have the tongue so snug that just by setting it in place it would kind of align itself. The problem was the 1/8 inch really wasn't a whole lot for times, especially if it was really humid. This panel would really take on a lot of moisture and actually start breaking the joint loose. So I just learned from other people's mistakes and or issues that they've had, and kind of improve it from there. Everybody's system works differently, so I'm not here to tell you that this is the way it has to be done. It's just the way that I do things, because the way I've learned from other people. The one thing I should also point out is when you're getting glue on these tenons, you know, I said that you really don't want a whole lot here, and you for surely don't want a whole lot up here. You just probably in general don't want a whole lot that close to the inside edge, because what will happen is with all the hydraulic pressure that this glue creates, because it's a liquid, you can actually get some inside the groove here, which is fine, but if you get too much in there, you can actually glue the corner of the insert to the rail. And if you do that on both sides, when this panel expands and contracts because it's glued in place, when it shrinks in the wintertime, it'll actually split. Now, the one thing I failed to do in the last door is I failed to make sure it was laying flat. I did look at it though before. I think I got lucky, but I always just take a scrap piece of wood and just tap it, make sure it's laying flat. It's part of the problem with my mouth running when I'm trying to do a video. Okay, I got 29 and 13/16 here. I've got 29 3/4. This one's starting to upset me a little bit. See if I can just change the clamp here a little bit, enough to make it move. Yeah, we're back at that 32nd now. Okay. We're 29, just a shy 32nd, and 29 3/4 and a strong 32nd. So it's still roughly about that 32nd of an inch strong on a square. I'm going to leave that just because the more I futz with it, the less time I got to work with it. Because once the glue sets up, if you start monkeying around with this too much, you can actually break the bond, and then the molecular structure of the glue will never actually go back to its original bonding state. So being now that I've been working on this for a few minutes, I'm really running out of workability time. And if the joint is already start to set up and I break that bond, the bond will never be the same. So, okay, I'm going to leave this alone. Wipe off the excess glue. No glue in the corners again, that's a nice thing. Now you might be wondering, it's like, well, you know, why would you want glue squeeze out on the surface? And the reason being is because this door is a 1/16 thicker than what it needs to be, because I get all the solid material, the solid board stock, machined and delivered at 13/16 thick, and everything finishes at 3/4 when it comes out of the shop. The company that I take my doors and face frames and drawer parts to and all that, when they run it through the sander, they finish this out at about 3/4. They're taking off roughly about 30 thousandths off the entire surfaces of the door. So actually it's probably a little bit closer to 40 thousandths. When this is all said and done, this will probably be just a little bit over 3/4, but it'll be closer to 3/4 than 13/16. All I'm really after is removing the glue and evening up the joints. Now, even though I've taken a lot of time in setting up the machines to make sure my joints are perfectly flat, that's not the whole idea of the sander. The sander will also take out any chatter and milling marks from the lumber from the lumber mill. So, okay, I'm going to let this door dry, and that'll be it for assembling doors. I'll probably just do a little bit of a quick review to show you the finished product when it's all said and done here.